Let me kickstart the second day. We have a keynote speech. Princess Marilyn Douala co-founded the Contemporary Art Center Doula'art in Douala, Cameroon in 1991 with the art historian Didier Schaub and a group of friends. Doula'art has been conceived as a research action laboratory that accompanies urban and citizen transformation, placing art creation in and out of the white cube at the heart of processes of education, dialogue, and sociological research. Marta Pucciarelli is a researcher at the Institute of Design at the Department of Environment, Construction and Design of the University of Applied Science and Arts of Southern Switzerland, SUPSI. Her research interest focuses on the accessibility and impact of cultural heritage on cultural and social inclusion of peripheral communities. Welcome, Marilyn and Marta.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I'm coming from a very far country and from the very south.
Thank you also from my side. So our talk will be about public art as a powerful tool of reconnection. Public art allows reconnecting people among them. It allows reconnecting people to their past and contemporary heritage. And it allows reconnecting people with their urban and mental spaces. Public art production process open up new spaces of freedom, of encounters, of connection, of dialogue with the communities. They contributed in building more inclusive societies and in transforming cities. So today we are very pleased to be here and to present the case of Douala as an exemplary case of public art production. And we hope to inspire all of you with our presentation. So please.
Yeah, next. Okay. Then we are going to speak about my life, my last 30 years in this country, Cameroon, and in this city of Douala, which was my village previously for my ancestors, and the name of the city came from my family. So it's a city which is very important for me because I want people. Douala is a metropolis of Cameroon, 5 million inhabitants, and it's the harbor. It's the profile of the city is nowadays the profile of an economic city, and no one cares about art and culture. There is no museums. There is few galleries, but there is no theaters, nothing for entertainment for people. It's just for economics. Then, when we started in 1991, my husband and I, he's somewhere in the sky, we decided to create areas of comfort, areas of being on our ease in this ancient village where you have also the traditional villages inside the city, and in this city where a lot of people are coming from different parts of the country and of the world. So the population is very cosmopolitan, on dit ça? And it's a very fragmented population. I mean, they don't meet, they have no places, there is no equipment for meeting and so on. So when we started, it was a period, a very specific period at the beginning of the 90s, where people were in the street claiming for more democracy in Cameroon. and there were a lot of riots, and by the end, violence from the authorities, blood, and so on. And we, as Doula'art, we decided we created this organization, this non-profit organization, to enhance the idea of thinking that make a proof that the street has to be a place of negotiation and not a place for fighting. Then we have offered, the city of Douala is schematically represented here, and the points, the colors you would see, is the artwork we have offered to the city, inside the city, the public artworks. And for now, we can say that we have offered about 100 artworks and performances inside the city of Douala in different areas. And the main tool we have created is a festival. It was a triennial, but after the pandemic, it started to become something else. I don't know. And it's a festival which is called SUD, S-U-D, Salon Urbain de Douala, to make the city to create the city as a place where you can meet, you can speak, you can decide what you want to do. The SUD was a triennial, and it's about each edition has a topic, a specific topic, and we do invite artists from different places, international artists and local artists. We ask them to be in residency and to invent, to create what kind of artwork they will offer to the population, to the people, to give sense to this topic, specific topic. And we discover the city of Douala. We, as people looking and having reflection on the city, but also the people, in the grassroots people, let's say, they also discover new areas, new way of taking the city. So we also, and the next edition will take place by the end of next year, December 2025, and the topic, the subject is reconnection.
Okay. Well, in Douala, public art installation can be implemented in two different areas. Control urbanized spaces, which are the city's primary axis, and social urban spaces, within informal neighborhoods or next to where people live. Depending on the areas of implementation, we can find different typology of public art installation. Here we can see monumental art installation that are placed within very traffic roundabout of the city. Here we can see La Colombe Pascal by Pascal Martin Taillou. That is a totem of superimposed enamel pot that aims at glorifying the African woman and the tradition of conserving water within this pot. These other artworks, Dzumhur by the local artist Coco Comègne. Dzumhur means in the language of Douala, what's that? And it's a reflection about the new role of the family within the city. At the beginning, when it was installed in 2007, it was placed at the boundary of the city. So at the end of the city. But now, after almost 20 years, the city's urbanization has grown a lot, and now it is considered a piece, a monumental installation exactly within the city. And then we have La Nouvelle Liberté by Joseph Francis Soumenier, that is the icon of the city. We will talk better about this monument later. But it's a 12-meter sculpture made of recycled materials in the middle of a very important roundabout that you can find when enter or exit to the city. These artworks show the other typologies of public art installation that we can find in Douala. Here we can find passageways installation or proximity artwork. Passageways installation are in general murals or small-scale sculptures located within the inner cities, but next to where people pass by. And why proximity artwork, like the works Le Jardin Sonore by Lucas Grandin, are mostly architectural installations that have very specific function. And here, the process of building them is really important. Le Jardin Sonore by Luca Grandin is a wooden structure of 3 stages that he's working as a panoramic viewpoint on the Vuri River, and it's a very magic place and a very beautiful viewpoint on the city of Douala. But he's working also as a botanic garden fed by local community with medical plant and groceries. While Faisalo by Salui Fulindu, there are panels in steel and plastics that looked at a certain distance. It seemed a single stream, and they were built with the aim to protect fishermen to after a day of work when they wash and when they change themselves. So here.
Yeah,
what do I?
Oh, this.
Right. We
That's
can go.
yours.
Well, that's yours. I can go. So these are only just few examples of public artworks produced in Douala in extremely critical context. And but after all this experience of Doula'art, we can see that we can reflect on the need of producing a public art for reconnecting people, for reconnecting heritage, and for reconnecting spaces.
So I forgot to add something, which is all what we have offered make the city of Douala as a museum, and a museum which is a place where you can reflect on yourself. You can be in confrontation of something you have never seen, and then you try to think about who you are, where you are, and how you are. And the reconnection is very important. Connection is something which is with a lot of flows, let's say flux, can be spirituality and so on, energy. But what is very structural in the work we are doing for the next 2 years now, it's about the reconnection between people, among themselves, the reconnection between people, from people and heritage, how they are linked to the heritage, and the reconnection, the connection or reconnection to space. Then about people, what is very important for us, and this is central in our way of the processes we are putting on the field, it's about the way we try to enhance the human dimension of the people, because nowadays, in that fragmentation, in that way of we are lost, the youth, kids are lost, and they have no more sensitivity. It's very common to see blood and violence, so they lost their human dimension. And the work we are doing is to enhance the new representation of the reality they are faced, activates the imaginary and getting in the possibility to dream and escape from reality. We are also trying to fight against fear of foreigners and authorities, what means the forces and the violences. The social political dimension, this is evident. Obviously, it's about cohesion. It's about the ability to dialogue, not to fight, but to try to get in conversation. to be connected, to maybe through exchanges elaborate new ideas together with people, and maybe enhance, increase new values, collective values, social, political dimension. And the political dimension, which is very important for us, it's about how to help people to be part of the decision making. And in their neighborhoods, most of the time, with the artist, of course, they can decide what they want to do and how it will be. It's an artwork. It's not the people who are doing the work, but they are part of the work. It's not participation, it's an inclusion of the way people think. So the artists are mediators, the artists are activators of the possibility to speak together, to do together, to think together. And the public art is mediation. Public art is mediation permanently or post-permanently.
So now I would like to show you a couple of examples related to this social and political dimension of public art and also the human dimension. This artwork is La Passerelle de Belsengue by Alioum Moussa. It's a wood bridge with a handrail designed by Alioum Moussa, representing men holding hands in different colors to represent the different ethnicity of this of the neighborhoods, but also it is an important artwork, this one, because it's one of the first one created in Douala, because here people, the community, took the social responsibility to decide the artist that they wanted to express their common values. During the artistic process in 2003, they opened up discussions and decided with Doula'art to create a contest, an artistic contest for selecting the artwork. And they finally decide for Alioum Moussa. So this is not just a bridge for Douala, for the neighborhood of Belsengue, but it's a symbol of collective vision and collaboration. So the second example is completely different. It's a performance that was organized in during the 2017 by two international artists. This was really a magic moment that represented the human dimension. This was a performance organized on the courtyard of an important public school in Douala, where an inflatable balloon with projected scenes of 3 workshops previously held within a school on the theme of human rights gave people the possibility of stopping and looking at this balloon as a vehicle of imagination. So this ball becomes a metaphor for giving the possibility to people of dreaming, of getting out to their reality for one moment, and considering new perspective to reimagine how we live, how we interact with the others, with the space. So it was really an evocative moment, and the balloon looked like a moon in the courtyard. So, if you want.
So we said it about the human value next, how our public artwork and the processes enhance the human value of people. Heritage. Heritage is so important. So heritage has 2 axes. One is the journey in a common past. Heritage is a testimony, a witness of what we have been, what has passed before, what happened before. And heritage is also something we can create. Nowadays, each day, each period, we do create the heritage for the next generations, and they will look at us through what we have given, what we have left as an heritage. So we are creating also our heritage.
And here other two artworks. This is La Station de la Mémoire, Memory Station, by the artist Justine Banda. This tells about the need of people, of Cameroonian young people, to have to know their leaders. It represents on an ancient bus station located next to a school. It represents two Cameroonian heroes of resistance. But in order to recreate and rewrite the history, the artist involved elder people and also school children to rewrite these stories and to evidence some of the words related to the freedom, the dignities, in order to create a link between the past and the present, and giving the possibility of people to think also about the future based on their past. So this work is about collective memories of people, and it puts in relation the observer, the testimonies, and the artwork itself. The other work is La Nouvelle Liberté, and has anticipated you, it's an icon of the city. It's also a symbol of the nation today. It's a 12-meter sculpture made of recycled material, and which pays tribute to the contemporary culture of the city, of citizens, to their capacity of getting by in many complex situations. And this has many monumental installations. When they are placed, they generate enthusiasm, but also high criticism. So this also began, especially at the beginning, a space of freedom, a space for discussing about themes that otherwise would be difficult to express in relation, for example, to ethnicity. But nowadays it has been appropriated also by the community, and of course these sculptures had the most important urban transformation around the installation. So
heritage is the way we are dealing with heritage is a connection to temporal trajectories, and we really help people to. We organize tours in the city. We do work in schools and so on, inside and outside schools, and we do help people to reread and rewrite history, but also to develop new narratives. And the question of the La Nouvelle Liberté, it's very interesting because, it's very important because it's like in the previous time in the villages, when you had the getting out of the masks, it was very important for the society, for the community this time, to understand that they are part of the same community, you know. And now with the Nouvelle Liberté, new narrative, which is really recognition of the practices of people, people do recognize themselves as belonging to this city, to this country of Cameroon. And the question of heritage is about we are part of the same history. Okay, space. Oh, space. Space is an abstraction. And we can have public art as a space, a part of materialization of spaces. It's also, with landmarks, there is new appropriation. People in Cameroon, they can rename an artwork, you know, they give new names. And then space gives new volumes as materiality of space. Artworks, I mean. Art is also a possibility to dematerialization of the space. With the artwork we have offered, there is a new cartography, mental cartography of the city. And space is, art is also in the way we are dealing with it, possibility to create equipment facilities and to desacralize art. Public art is also part of development, of settlement of the city.
Okay. This is an example of a landmark giving meaning to the space. These artworks is the Teatro Sur's Didier Shob by the artist Philippe Aguirre that was created in the neighborhood of Ndokpasi, a very isolated neighborhood of the city, and it is an amphitheater in concrete that was built over a multi-level depression of mud, a natural depression of mud, built around the only natural spring and access to water of the neighborhood. Today, this is the most important urban landmark of the entire neighborhood, where it has addressed a new meaning to the space, because it's not important just for kids going to take waters, but also it has become a place of meetings of young people or even of women for going there, chatting, organizing community and collective events. So it has become a collective spaces in general and a space of dialogue. The other example is quite different because within the same neighborhood, it's about Le mots écrits des Nouvelles, a series of 6 mural installation within the neighborhood of Duala that were created by the artist Hervé Yangen. There are different installations within the same neighborhoods. Murals are built in concrete, are light installation, or they are mosaic installation. And here they allow creating artistic and mental path of residents, but also visitors throughout the neighborhoods. Visitors that otherwise wouldn't enter in the neighborhood of Nouvelle because it's really known as a dangerous neighborhood. While they are not durable, they have reshaped partially the perception of the city, emerging from the anonymity and prompting a revaluation of its image. And then they also have influenced the people perception and the behavior, residents' behavior of the city. We go ahead. We have 5 minutes.
So, for conclusion, we are faced in our work faced to 3 challenges, and really it's about power and control. It's very interesting for us to see that when we have offered an artwork, it becomes something else. It can become a place for a new generation of money, and people take advantage of this public artwork in their neighborhoods or in the city. And it has also been recuperated sometimes by the authorities. And the Nouvelle Liberté in the passport is now in the passport. They don't know the name of the artist, but they put it in the passport. So it's a recognition. The second thing is, the second point of challenge is about sustainability. We don't fight for I'm wrong. We are fighting for the sustainability, but it needs a lot of means. We don't have those means, and we do now integrate the idea that an artwork can disappear, and we are faced to that sometimes. But it never completely disappears. It is printed somewhere. Janelle spoke about that yesterday. But the alternative on the tangible artwork, which is maybe disappearing, possibly disappearing, is the digital aspect, and maybe it's a very good alternative for the sustainability. With Wiki Commons, we have now the whole work we have given offered to the city of Douala. And the last point about the challenges is about the street, the city as a place for claiming for democracy or giving words to people about politics. They have no places, no platform for discussion officially. So the street can be a place for claiming, but a place for quiet claiming. And the artwork of Sylvie Blochet, which is a French artist, she was apologize for what the French people, the French government has done in Cameroon. It has been a very awful story. I will, if I have time, next time I will explain to you. And she asked for apologizes, and this has developed a so huge debate about the French colonization in Cameroon. And it's a place where also you have this very important question. As I told, we are a non-profit organization, a small one, 5 persons working inside. And we had the possibility to do it because we had the authorization of the city hall. But around this roundabout, we have 3 villages, and the chiefs of the villages decided that this artwork is very interesting, but it doesn't have to be there because it didn't ask us for allowance. And the third situation, so Republican, let's say, power, administrative one, the traditional one, and people. And these artworks has been destroyed by few persons who are saying, okay, we are fighting for our freedom, for our emancipation, but we'd like to be the one who are in the representation, we are represented, and this white woman is not a representation of who we are. So some people decided, and it was also another debate. So artwork, public artwork, is a space of negotiation, discussion about who we are, who has the power to decide of what, how we can be represented in the public spaces. That's it.
That's it. Thank you.
I forgot the question. See it?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the presentation. Since the last image, oh no, my phone, I have to control. So since the last image was about La Nouvelle, about the performance of the French artist, and you said it received criticism because there was no sharing. It was felt a little bit as an imposition. I would love to understand more of this kind of process. You talked about criticism and enthusiasm also when you talked about La Nouvelle Liberté, saying that it was controversial. So how is the public debate about public art in Douala?
It's very crucial, and it's done through different, let's say, groups or platforms. One is the proximity. I mean, people come to us, or we do organize conferences and debates, public debates about that those artworks, but also through the media, the press. Comment on dit la presse papier? Newspaper, and because La Nouvelle Liberté was created before the social medias. And it was really through those radio and so on. And it was a possibility for people to speak about what happened. And they were really in discussion, not fighting. Then it's through the media most of the time, the discussion. The Sylvie Blochet artwork was not imposed totally, but it's always imposed when it's in somehow in structures, spaces. We can work with people, some people around, but the majority of the population of the city, the citizens, are not aware of what's going on, so they are surprised. And the discussions with those people are in the streets, in the bars, and so on. And we don't know exactly, sometimes, we don't know exactly what kind of discussion they have, but they do speak about that, and that's the most important, to free the speeches of people.
I also love the fact that you talked about sustainability and the artwork which was represented in the passport, so somewhat La Nouvelle Liberté, even though one day maybe, you know, it will physically decay, it's still there, you know, in the identity of Cameroon's people. Marta, do you believe in your experience in Cameroon that the sense of community there is the same or is different than the example we heard yesterday, for instance, in the US or in Europe, and if so, how?
Yes, I think that we like to speak about communities, but also about collectivities in Douala. Because collectivity is made of different people, of different ethnicities, as we said, for example, especially with proximity artworks, when we can work with the community, the collectivity is made by different stakeholders, by young people, by elder people, by a small community of development, and that work together to decide and to take part of the process, to be inclusive, not just to use public art as a means for protest, but as a means for social cohesion and building something together. What is interesting is that it's not about participation in the process of public art, but it's really an inclusion of the community within the decision making. I think that in Douala is like that. Would you like to add something else? Turn the microphone.
No, I'm not stressed. Thank you. So if I can add something about this question, I think what I understood quite well yesterday and today, I mean, it's the real difference between what we are, the context we have, and the one in US. Is that in my country, we are faced to fragmentation. We have a lot of communities. They are not able quite well to speak together because of the politics system. In the US, there is segregation. There is really a community which is not considered at all. And the fight this community has is not the same as the one we have in our context. This is the main difference.
Thank you. So I'll open the discussion to the public. We have 5 minutes, so a couple of questions. Yeah, Elizabeth? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was such a thoughtful presentation. I loved what you were both saying about that transition from participation to inclusion. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what are the processes that your program puts in place in order for that inclusion to happen. For example, you mentioned one of the artworks, the bridge, that involved sort of decision-making from local groups. So it would be great to hear more about the specifics of that process, if possible.
Okay. Well, I can answer a bit. The process is different depending on the typology of the installation. Often when we talked about proximity artworks, people in the community is involved since the beginning, since the conceptualization and reflection about their needs. It's for that often artwork has architectural features and have very functional values. So they decide what they needed together with the artists, together with the Doula'art, together with even the authorities. And in the process, as an example of the Passerella de Bessenguet or with the artist Les Jardins Sonores, they decide what to put of themselves within the artworks and how to express the collectivity within the artworks. And they decide until the end. They are involved until the end. Then, of course, there is a problem of maintenance of those artworks. So people take the social responsibility of informing Doula'art, of substituting sometimes wooden planks, or if they cannot, but of course informing the authorities and asking for renovation of the artworks. But they lived within the artworks, they cross it every day, and even if they do not, after maybe 20 years, I think, of experience, the Passerella is there since 20 years. The role of the artist, maybe the name of the artist, is not remembered by the new generation, but they cross the bridge every day, and this becomes part of the identity of the neighborhood. I don't know.
As a laboratory, we are. The art intervention is part of the process. So before, as Marta said, we have a lot of discussion with people, what are their priorities for development. And then when we define the priorities are defined, we ask the artists to come and to speak with people. And in that case of Passerelle, La Passerelle, the bridge, it was a contest. So there were different artists who proposed different shape of bridges, and people decided which one they were wanted, which one was a discussion, conversation with themselves. It was a representative groups, of course, and the young generation doesn't know how the process has been done, but that's it. And each project has its own process. It's not, well, a lot of discussion before, of course, but the discussion with the artists are quite different. Even moreover, when there are artists coming from foreign countries, and those artists are hosted in 2 residencies, one for being immersed in the context, and because the situation is quite complicated, and particular in Cameroon, in Douala, and the second one for the creation of the artwork.
Thank you so much. We have run out of time to the next section on communities. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, we will move directly from the keynote straight to the first set of presentations this morning, and those are on the topic of communities. So our first presenter is Karen Mack, who founded LA Commons 20 years ago to leverage the power of arts and culture to empower individuals, build connections, and also develop communities. The South LA-based nonprofit implements a range of programs, from murals to festivals to tours and beyond, reflecting the unique character of the diverse neighborhoods. Let's welcome Karen.
Good morning. First of all, I want to just say what a pleasure it's been to be in space with everyone, speakers, attendees. This is an extraordinary gathering of thinkers about public art, and I'm so honored to be in your midst, and I really want to thank our organizers for bringing us together and for having me. I started LA Commons actually almost 25 years ago now, and it began with a question: how can art and cultural participation foster a greater sense of belonging among Angelenos? And you are not the only one who lives in a fragmented place. Los Angeles is a very challenging city because it's so large, so diverse, and people tend to be atomized, in their own spaces. And so we share the belief that, places are stronger when people are in community with each other, and art has the power to build that community. And, I think our world is fragmented in many ways. We see it, I don't need to go into it because, we all are watching the news. But for the folks that are in the neighborhoods where we are doing our work, they have an opportunity to plug in and get connected through the programming that we do there. Our mission is to engage communities in artistic and cultural expression that tells their unique stories and serves as a basis for dialogue, connection, and a shared understanding of Los Angeles. This is our very first project in the mostly Central American immigrant neighborhood of Westlake MacArthur Park. We had a bit of beginner's luck to be able to put these artworks up in these giant trees. And the artwork was based on neighbors coming and doing art and telling stories under those trees. And Andy Ledesma, our community art programs director, Beth Peterson, led a team of emerging and youth artists to transform those stories into these artworks. And since that first project, we have done at least 80 projects throughout the city. This one by Sonia Romero, also in MacArthur Park, uplifting the stories of the youth that were participating. This is Herzegovina, the place where we gather, a historic arch that was transformed by Paula Lopez and Heriberto Luna. This is our Day of the Ancestors Festival of Mass, an annual event that brings the community together to venerate ancestors and in so doing connect to the African diaspora and community wellness. This is our Creating Our Next LA project, done entirely during the pandemic, much of it online, story gathering, which Dominique Moody worked with Haleen Oberby, who is a photographer, and Esprel Sharp, a poet, to uplift the stories, inspirational coping stories during COVID to promote mental health. Another in our series of Creating Our Next LA, where Mandy Pulasic invited people from all over Los Angeles to imagine a city as we were coming out of COVID. I want to share, I have a video for you of one of our most successful projects because of the robust intergenerational engagement that was part of the project. And what I would ask you to note is the partnerships, which are a very important part of the work that we do.
part of Hyde Park is just a love letter to the community and the people who came up there, just trying to uplift the area.
With these projects, we want it to really be a community-driven effort.
Talking with Metro, who got in with LA Commons and got this project going.
And so they were able to secure funding with Transportation for America.
That kernel then resulted in this broader team of young people who then took it as their charge to interview the community.
I've been learning a lot of things that I didn't realize about Hyde Park, this little community I've lived in my entire life.
These are everyday people who have made a positive impact on this community. And that's where it starts.
I'm very honored, I'm very proud, and I'm very glad that I could participate in this project.
We knew that Queen Calafia had to be someone who was regal and expressed power, and she did that for us. That's why we chose her.
A part of what happens with the artwork is that it's alive. When you look at it, you really feel a sense of connectedness.
With Nipsey, the community always depicted him as this king of Crenshaw and Slauson. And so that's why I chose to use the gold leaf.
Kind of like an inspiration for me to know that I'm doing something right in the community for them to even want to put my picture up on a mural.
As far as the Adinkra symbols, it's a unifying theme in the area, but then they also draw back to Africa. So we were able to take all those meanings and bring them into one wall.
It really is a masterpiece. And I know it's going to really brighten the corner of Crenshaw and Slauson.
Public art and transportation always go hand in hand. There's nothing that makes those trips better like seeing a dope public art piece.
Really proud to hear from a lot of different people within the community that they were proud of us. Yeah, it just felt good to know that it was appreciated.
I hope that the mural inspires people to open themselves up to those around them.
I appreciate the mural. I think it looks like us. And that was the most important component. I am Hyde Park.
I am Hyde Park. I am Hyde Park.
I am Hyde Park. I am Hyde Park.
I am Hyde Park.
We are Hyde Park.
So to reiterate the process, community grounding is the first step in our projects. Then we gather stories, archive the stories, which is one of our most challenging, I think, aspects of the project, and then make the stories visible. This grounding in community is very important and is done through these partnerships that we generate with our organizational partners. This photograph is of the 25th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, and many of our partners and our LA Commons team did a march in recognition of that as one aspect of our work together. And they partner with us in doing all kinds of projects. Gathering the stories is really, the most important part of what we do. It's a very powerful process. When people come together and they listen and they are heard, there's an alchemy that happens. That is where the connection really starts. And in addition to that connection, we are given rich material that forms the basis for the artwork. And I would say, as many of you colleagues have spoken about, the idea of narrative change at a time when truth is being debated to promote the authentic stories of community members is really a way for us all to plug into what is actually true and real. this issue of archiving, again, is one of the most challenging because, and some of the speakers yesterday spoke about this, you get so much material. The challenge is actually, deciding what to archive. So we are, struggling a little bit with that, but we have a project. This project is our Cultural Treasures of South LA project. We crowdsourced about 270 cultural treasures, and then out of that, 20 of them, these 20, or this isn't all of them, but 20 of them were actually documented on film and are on our website, southlaculture.org. And the last thing I would say is that making the stories visible is what public art is very good at, but not the only way to make stories visible. I remember when Todd yesterday was talking about, the work that was on the ground and some of it not being there anymore. But that's okay because the stories about the work were out there, and there are many ways to tell those stories, including public programming like our Day of the Ancestors, like Dia de los Muertos celebrations, etc., that annually lift up those stories. In California, there's an ethnic studies requirement now, which I think provides a very powerful opportunity to lift up stories that may be untold. Social media, augmented reality, and other technological innovations, as well as historic preservation. In a lot of the communities that we work in, there isn't a lot of material, buildings that are prominent or, attractive, but the stories are there. So how do we bridge historic preservation and storytelling to really preserve the richness in community? These stories are very important, and I'll leave you with a quote from James Baldwin, who really says it well. For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It's the only light we've got in all this darkness. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. And the next presenter is Sylvia Jeffriess, who is a conservator working in modern and contemporary art with a background in contemporary art fabrication. Her fabrication background includes working directly with a range of contemporary artists. She completed a master's of cultural materials conservation at the University of Melbourne, and internships at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, and modern art conservation in New York City. She worked as the associate conservator at the Museum of Art Conservation for 6 years before taking a position to head up a new preservation department at UAP. Let's welcome Sylvia.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to all the other speakers from the symposium, along with the organizers here as well, who have done such an amazing job at putting on this wonderful event that we're at. The preservations and discussions have been truly insightful and extremely thought-provoking as well, and it's a pleasure to have been invited to be here too. So, as Remy mentioned, I'm an art conservator specializing in modern and contemporary art conservation, but I came to the field by way of a background in art fabrication and monumental sculpture before doing my master's in conservation. After training, I worked in private practice for over 6 years in a paintings conservation studio, and have now, over the last 2 years, been developing and leading the preservation department for a large-scale art fabrication company, UAP. After chatting with a few people yesterday, I know that there is a few people who know a little about what UAP do, but for those who aren't so familiar, it's a multinational consultancy and art fabrication firm with offices and foundries in Australia, Asia, and North America, most recently taking over the legacy foundry Polish Talix in upstate New York. And since UAP specializes in the production, design, and installation of monumental and public artworks, my role developing a preservation department within this art fabrication and foundry environment has enabled me to combine a passion and interest in fabricated and public art, as well as allowing me to rethink some of my assumptions and positions when it comes to the preservation of fabricated artworks in the service of this pursuit. While working as a paintings conservator after grad school, I had the pleasure of treating a gorgeous piece by a Japanese-born artist, Shusaku Arakawa. The work was a large-scale, monumental, monochrome blue painting which had met the unfortunate fate of some small ice cream-covered hands of the collector's children. This meant that I got to spend a year conserving the work to restore the evidence of the egregious damages on the piece, but it also gave me exposure to the work of Arakawa and his collaborative working partner, Marilyn, and an opportunity to delve into their working philosophy of reversible destiny. This philosophy has intrigued me ever since, especially as it pertains to preservation in light of their artistic intent and the development into the space of public art and architecture. So for my project here, I'm looking at a few of their architectural projects specifically and how this dovetails with the conversations that we're having today surrounding community and access and preservation. So a little introduction to Arakawa Gins. Shusaku Arakawa and Marilyn Gins initiated the Reversible Destiny Foundation at their home in New York City in 2010 with the core concept of achieving immortality. This immortality was not necessarily literal, but conceptually to be found through an investigation of and direct interaction with the materials employed in the construction of the artworks. Arakawa, coming from a background in conceptual art and painting, originally in the Gutai movement of Japan, and Gins as an experimental writer and poet, the two artists later in their career turned their attention to architectural and public artworks to look at the relationship between the body, entropy, and materiality. These works went on to finally manifest as the Reversible Destiny Foundation and were underpinned by the manifesto, The Architectural Body, which was initially published in 2002, from which much of the later architectural ideas were predicated upon. While many of their planned architectural works were unable to be realized, my research looks at the 4 major public pieces that were developed and fully realized during their lifetime. This is one such of those projects, which is called the Mitaka Lofts, in memory of Helen Keller, which was finished in 2005 and located in Mitaka, a middle-class suburban neighborhood just outside the central Tokyo in Japan. It's a collection of prefabricated apartments, which is still entirely in use as residences that people continue to live in, even though it has this very interesting and unique type of architecture. The subtitle, In Memory of Helen Keller, is also a note to the artist's interest in accessibility, as well as they wanted to really think about the types of experiences that people have and ensuring that access is for all. The other case studies that I'm looking at include the ubiquitous site, Naji's Ryoanji, Architectural Body Interior, which is a permanent installation at Najimoka in Okayama, the site of Reversible Destiny in Yoro Park in Gifu Prefecture, the Mitaka Lofts that you just saw, the Bios Cleve House Life Extending Villa in East Hampton in New York as well. And here's a few images of those other 3 sites in addition to the Mitaka Lofts. The full list of their architectural projects of Arakawa Gins begins in '94 with the construction of the ubiquitous site Naji's Ryoanji, Architectural Body Interior, the permanent installation at the Architectural Museum Najimoka, designed by Arata Izazaki in Okayama. Following this piece, the artist then went on to develop the large-scale sculpture park site of Reversible Destiny, which you can see in the upper right. This site is an incredibly large-scale public outdoor sculpture site, which is entirely open to the public. The entry fee is 700 yen, which is probably about $2.50, so it's incredibly accessible to all. And the area is one which is on the outskirts of any major city. It's in an industrial area, and it's really meant for families to enjoy. The space is also noted to be very physically dangerous as well, with the head of the Reversible Destiny Foundation noting that she had been injured at least 4 times in her visits to the foundation, to the site. The apartment complex Mitaka Lofts, in memory of Helen Keller in Tokyo, which is now under the care of the Reversible Destiny Foundation, and the privately commissioned home, the Bioscleve House, which is in the Hamptons, which garnered extensive media attention for its low market price during COVID, has only recently been returned to the custodianship of the Reversible Destiny Foundation. And then in addition to this, there is also the biotopological scale juggling escalator, a staircase located at and owned by the Dover Street Market, which was commissioned by Ray Kawakubo of Comme des Garçons in New York, United States. In addition to these pieces as well, there was also a privately commissioned smaller complex of apartments that was developed in Nagoya, in Japan, shortly prior to the Mitaka Lofts. The artists entirely abandoned their authorship of this project, however, as only one residence was realized true to their drawings. The other apartments were built as iterations from the first dwelling, and these subsequent iterations were deemed so far watered down from the original design that not only did the artists take their names off the work, they also destroyed almost all of the supporting material for the site that was held in the archive due to their frustrations. So when we're thinking about public art preservation and participation, public art obviously holds unique needs for its preservation, as we see from this photo at the site of Reversible Destiny, because of the sustained engagement that is constant within these spaces. Some of the key considerations for works with these higher levels of participation include balancing preservation needs with the interactive components of an architecturally scaled artwork, ensuring public participation is sustained for the work to exist per the artist's intent. And then in addition to this, the original material decisions of the artist during the construction of the artwork versus the industry material developments is something that I've personally been thinking about. If we're thinking that the artist's intent is what we are trying to preserve, then we need to think about what we do choose to keep and why. When we're thinking about access, condition, and maintenance, architectural and/or public artworks have a much higher level of maintenance due to their sustained ongoing exposure and the participation with the materials. And we see these types of conditions as very clear in spaces like Euro Park, typical of any outdoor sculpture park. Yet the exposure and participation with these artworks is key to preserving the artist's intent. So then we need to ask, how do foundations and estates plan for the financial needs for the ongoing care and maintenance, such as in these architectural works? And as an additional question, are there changes that are permissible to ensure ongoing sustainable conservation of these spaces if they enable their ongoing activation per the intent of the artist? Analyzing 4 of the architectural projects of Arakawa Gins provides a level of insight into the impact of the varying types of custodianship and what they have on the preservation of each of these works. Each of the case studies chosen holds a different model of custodianship, be it public, private, institutional, and/or foundation-based, and show unique strengths and challenges as a result through the sites themselves are relatively similar in their material construction and intent. From looking at these examples, I believe the importance on participation in the architectural projects of Arakawa Gins by utilizing the principles of time-based media and performance art conservation is a key framework for understanding the complexity inherent in preserving an active site rather than a static object. Custodianship and the market hold a direct impact on preservation decision-making frameworks, and how these may differ largely is based on the voices involved in the care of each particular work. For public artworks, and especially those on an architectural scale, the complexity of these conversations increases as the care of the work intersects with public and municipal policy, market influence, real estate values, and the conflicting interests of these various parties. Education of the parties involved in these conversations to ensure a nuanced understanding of the engagement with the artist's intent, in this case of Arakawa Gins being the ongoing activation of the sites, will be the key to ensuring their ongoing sustainable care of the works and a longevity akin to the Reversible Destiny manifesto that the artist would be proud of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. And our next presenter is Taylor Cheng. Taylor is a London-based curator and writer from Hong Kong, currently pursuing an MFA in Arts and Humanities at the Royal College of Art. She is passionate about exploring the relationship between collaborations, the public, the surrounding environment, and the process through her performative thinking and curatorial practice. Let's welcome Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be here with so many experienced public art practitioners. Thank you for having me, and thanks to the team for making this symposium possible. Today, I will be discussing the forms of holding us together. What are the forms of holding us together? Who are we? And how should we stay with each other? According to Professor Iris Rogoff, the curatorial is about inhabiting a project. We are within it, not outside of it, and we live out its conditions, but we don't violate it. It is a non-confrontational movement between things. According to German theater theorist Max Herrmann, the original meaning of theater was derived from the fact that it was a social game played by all, for all, a game in which everyone is a player, participants, and spectators. In this context, I tried to expand the concept further by including the project team as players, incorporating the lens of performativity into my curatorial practice. Therefore, reimagining and reshaping the forms that hold us together, step by step. In this presentation, I will share the curatorial approaches behind a very small-scale public art project I curated in March of this year, and I would call some of them as performative curatorial approach. The project, called From Here to There, took place in the Riverside Gardens and a gallery space in London. Echoing the transient nature of the River Thames and the evolving communities in Wandsworth, the project collaborated with an artist, a datagrapher, and the public. The project has two phases. The first phase occurred in March, featuring an art experience by artist Chin-Si Kwan, engaging the public to explore how to navigate life changes, and at the same time, featuring the creation process of datagrapher Amir Beck, documenting Chin-Si's art experience for creating Amir's archival artwork. The upcoming second phase, scheduled for June, will exhibit Amir's archival artwork about Chinsi's art experience to explore how to perceive our memories transformed by changes. Project documentation may often be viewed as an avenue for extending a project's reach, facilitating its further development. And I wondered, how should the relationship between project documentation and art experience be more balanced? And I will talk about the relationship with the curator later. And I also wondered if project documentation itself could also serve as a core aspect of the project. In the first phase, by specifically positioning the event of showcasing and participating in the art experience and making process of the archival artwork, the first phase formed a mini stage of the two collaborators. While Chinsi was engaging with the public in the art experience, the public also witnessed that Amir conducted sound recording and 3D scanning for the participants on the same stage. The first phase shifted the focus from exhibiting finished artwork to showcasing the art-making process of the two collaborators. By staging both the artist and datagrapher in action, the project not only invited the public to feel and engage with the making process of the two collaborators, but also highlighted the eco-significance of both the artist and datagrapher. And in the second phase, there will be a solo display of Amir's archival artwork about Chinsi's art experience. The documentation itself will further transcend its traditional supportive role and become a core element within the project. Apart from that, during the artist's art experience and the datagrapher's artwork creation, the public and I also played a role in this theater to reshape the forms of relationships. During the artist's art experience, she hosted some stretching workshops with the public to interact with the yoga ball, opening up conversations on navigating life changes. To resonate with the project's concept and the bodily movements of the art experience, I created a scene of change and improvisational theater during the day of the art experience and archival artwork creation. I engaged with local residents who happened to be passing by, encouraging them to pause, deviate from their daily routines, and participate in our art experience. This spontaneous involvement mirrored the project concept, transience, and changes. When I interact with the public, my invitation script to the public underwent multiple revisions until it resonated with the majority of the people. During the invitation process, I choreographed my movements to involve local residents from diverse backgrounds with different ages, ethnicities, and genders. As a result, I act as a tangible and conceptual bridge between the public and the art experience. The artist and the public informed me on bridging the gap between the art experience and the public. I engaged the public with different ages, ethnicities, and genders physically. And then the public became part of the art experience and Amir's archival artwork. After the completion of the first phase, the second phase is a display of the archival artwork by the datagrapher. The artwork will later be circulated online as an alternative of project documentation. So how would the project stay with the public through the archival artwork? These are the drafts of the archival artwork, still images of the video work by Amir. So can you see Amir, the datagrapher in the videos too? It also mentions the notion of transience, the public engagement, and the site specificity, often seeing runners passing by a very transient location. The archival artwork aims to maintain ongoing dialogue with the public, to reflect on the notion of transience when they watch the project documentation. Therefore, Amir's artwork will further inform the dissemination of my project and inform the public after the project completion. This is my small-scale public art project and the forms of holding us together, the people, communities, and stakeholders. And to conclude, curating is a dynamic process that involves conceptual and physical engagement with project concepts, collaborators, and the public. By adopting performativity perspective into curating, it not only heightens our awareness of the audience, becoming more mindful to our actions and behaviors, but also gives us space to reimagine and possibly reshape the conditions, fostering more equitable connections with collaborators and the public. That's the end of my sharing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. And our final presentation for this panel is by Lejla Dzumhur, who's head of the Department of Theory and History of Architecture and Protection of Built Heritage at the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Sarajevo. She has collaborated with the Bosnian State Commission to preserve the national monuments on the reconstruction of the 1992-95 destroyed Ottoman heritage. Her research explores the history of architecture and urbanism of Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly the intertwinement of Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, and socialist architecture in the ex-Yugoslavia and its representations in post-colonial and post-war contexts. Let's welcome Lejla.
Buongiorno. Actually, it's Lejla Dzumhur. Thank you for your invitation. It's a great honor to be here today, and I'm very delighted, and it's a great honor. So let's start off with my presentation. Okay. So, as some of you may know, Sarajevo and Bosnia and Herzegovina were subject to Serbian and Croatian aggression from 1992 until 1995. And so, it was estimated that during the war, over 10,000 citizens of Sarajevo lost their lives in relentless shelling. The city was hit by a crazy number of 329 shells per day during the 1,425 days of the siege, which makes Sarajevo the winner, unfortunate winner. It's a capital city that endured the lengthiest siege in modern warfare history, lasting 3 times longer than the famous siege of Stalingrad. So, shells made their imprints all over the city and the streets pavements, causing also the deaths of many innocent people. And I didn't want to include any disturbing photos. This is photo showing the state immediately after one of the deadliest massacre that happened on an open market called Markale in Sarajevo. And actually, many of the wounded were transported to Italian hospitals here as the nearest ones, and unfortunately, many of them died here in Italy. And this is the photo after the second massacre in Markale. It occurred almost on the same spot as the previous one in 1994. So the traces of such exploded shells filled with the blood of the dead were described by local wartime journalists as bloody roses. Which citizens themselves started to mark them even during the war, but also filling these marks with some kind of colored material. They marked them in a different way, but by putting the flowers, as you can see, and which inspired the Sarajevo architect, which is my colleague at the same department at the Faculty of Architecture, Nejat Kurto, to design these non-monumental and non-stimulating memorials. So a total of about 100 remains were permanently encapsulated in red resin with the help of city authorities after the war, as you can see on the right slide of part of the slide. This is how one Markale rose looks like today. After the marking was completed in 1996, for many years the roses existed as such on the pavement of the streets and had no true status as a monument. They were kind of an alternative monument or anti-monument, and existing sometimes next to these conventional memorial plaques, monuments erected to commemorate the same event by the government and city authorities. On this slide we can see the Markale rose on the pavement of the street, and in the background this official memorial plaque erected by the city authorities. So no government institutions, agency or organization, even they have been officially protected on the cantonal level, had a legal obligation to preserve Sarajevo roses. They started to fade away, forgotten and decaying by being destroyed in an intense urban reconstruction after the war, with streets being revamped, new buildings going up and so on. These are just some of the photos of endangered roses today. And actually this is that I encounter on my way home from the faculty. And citizens, a multitude of local and international organizations contributed to preservation of roses and the promotion of their significance. So, sorry about that. But actually this was not sufficient, and only one small official project of restoring roses on a larger scale was funded by Ministry of Veteran Affairs of the Canton of Sarajevo, and 21 roses were restored. But decision on a level and a methodology of restoration and reconstruction were primarily guided by the challenges of performance technology to keep original shell trace and the overall formal expression. The significance of this request was often subject to informal negotiation. There was no extensive research about the importance of the originality, of the authenticity of roses' significance. The change in appearance occurred, And as you can see, a number of restored roses became separate and limited zones. They have this frame, metal frame today, as the solution to maintain the continuity of pavement material. Mostly asphalt was not found. And this was criticized even from the part of the citizens. However, the original mark was preserved in most cases, and only one roses was reconstructed, totally reconstructed. I forget to point out that the roses are also the subject of war crime trials and ordinated as evidence in such cases. So actually, their visual and narrative silence in their humble appearance as an initial artistic feature are problematic. So when passerby, particularly non-local and tourists, became aware of their existence, they seek for some kind of explanation and the narrative behind it, which must be recreated over and over again. The storyteller provides nuances in interpretation and understanding. The privilege to understand and explain is almost exclusively limited to those who experience and survive the siege, as promoted by such tourist agencies that are offering guided tours on Sarajevo roses. And they state that the war tour is exclusively led by tour guides who have personally experienced and survived the siege of Sarajevo. So very controversial. I'm sorry about that. So we are facing this, there is some, so we are facing this very controversial marking criteria recently set by Ministry of Veteran Affairs, which envisage preserving only those roses and only those traces of shells that killed 3 or more people. This criteria reduced enormously the initial mark number of over 100 roses. This, of course, should be reconsidered because although the roses are first intended to remember the victims, which is their most important value, they are also witnessing the all-encompassing urban transformation of Sarajevo into something that we call a landscape of survival. And for many people, this is very important. So, for example, this map shows the reality of daily life. These are positions of Bosnian Serb army on the surrounding hill, and on the blue line is actually the siege line. But the siege line is also positioned in the very center of the city. So actually, there is one part of the city called Grbavica, where I'm living today. It was under the command of Bosnian Serb army. So one neighborhood was facing another, and the snipers were operating from the high buildings and skyscapes. Orange areas were the most dangerous zones, and with these perpendicular streets, I don't have this pointer to show them. And they were almost completely exposed to sniper hits from the hills. So people developed a set of urban rules and survival strategies on all levels, completely transformed their apartments to new realities. On the left, we can see the apartment in a Pays, and on the right, we can see the transformed disposition during the war, but also the transformation occurred in urban space and open space as well. Photos are showing hard barriers that allowed somewhat safer movement throughout the city. And there were also these soft barriers. Soft barriers were actually the fabric spanned between two rows of buildings and blocked only the vision on the streets from the sniper position, because there was this saying, if you can see the hill also can see you, meaning snipers could target you. Most important role in the urban space was to run and not to gather and stand still, and we can see some of the picture of people running throughout the city. And mostly, as we can see on this photo, 2 people were running at the same time across the exposed areas, and others were waiting on their turn in the background, because there was this rhythm of sniper hits that was known to the citizens and to which they adjusted in their movement. So, to conclude, how to address the restoration of Sarajevo roses today. We have this vision that roses may be preserved by giving them a voice, a narrative, and a formal voice. Regarding narrative voice, they could be connected with existing collections like this online platform, Virtual Fema collection, Zij of Sarajevo. This is abundant collection of great narrative which does not insist on dates and verified facts, but rather on sharing the experience of people of all nationalities, ages and professions. A good example of the success of such initiatives of collaboration with citizens is the Museum for Childhood, and it's world's only museum that focuses on the childhood during the war. It's actually founded by a man who was a child during the war. I was also the child during the war. It displays a collection of personal items, photographs, letters, drawing, and other memories of growing up during the war, like this. So people are coming with their own stories, personal items, and everyone may contribute to the creation of a museum collection. But museum also archives audio and video testimonies collected through interviews, recorded testimonies. Museum is not only oriented on Bosnia, but on all areas affected by war. For example, it has collection created to work with Ukrainian children. And in terms of giving the visual voice to Sarajevo roses, we envision them as focal points where people will in future stand still and gather in public space, in contrast to the city under attack where hiding and running was the way of life. This gathering should be their main characteristics. So this was all. Thank you.
You can stay up here. Thank you, Lejla, and I'm going to ask the other presenters to have a seat. And I think, Vula, we have, 15 minutes or so? Yeah, okay, so we have some time. So thank you, all of you, but let's jump in so we can make use of our time and also have some questions. I have a question that really, I guess, is mostly spurred from the last 2 presentations, and actually something I've been thinking about the last 2 days as we see so many of the different posits from our colleagues. It has to do with documentation, obviously, which was addressed as a kind of embedded part of your practice, Taylor. And then also, Lejla, I think also shows up in your presentation in the way that you're talking about documentation, but it's in the others as well. And the question has to do with idealized documentation when it comes to expressing or conveying art or projects that relate to community. So that offering that we often, those of us who work in this practice, utilize to show that the community engagement moment worked. So the images we show reflect that. And I guess I'm wondering if you could expose through your various cases, and of course, Sylvia, I think your case gets to this question, some unresolved aspects that don't show up in these images. So the unresolved, which we know is real, if we are practitioners of social engagement or community or public art, we know that there's a lot of quiet time, dead time, moments when the work and the projects are not activated, when people get them wrong, when they atrophy, Sylvia, to your case. So I'm just wondering if we can expose some of those unresolved aspects of the works and the projects and the practices that don't show up when we share the clean, perfected versions of it.
Thank you for the question. The main problem in collecting this kind of narratives within museums and collection is people being some kind of raised in that sense that they are not questioning authorities. During the war, this gradual ethno-national reinvention occurred as a part of the political and economic transformation initiated from above, and the national elites polarized the population in their competition for power and resources. So we have this divided city these days. We have these three confessional and ethnic communities, which are Muslims. I'm one of this part of this community. I'm a Muslim, and we have non-Muslim communities as Orthodox and Catholic Christians. But we are raised during the socialist periods to not question the authorities, and we are in this post-socialist period kind of suppressed to talk about traumatic heritage and to talk about the traumas of the war. So it has passed almost over 30 years after the war, and we are still not be able to talk freely about what happened during the wars. And these kinds of initiatives are very welcomed. So people are going to museums and bringing their stuff. As you could see, they're bringing this ballet shoes and bringing their toys, and they are willing to speak about their experiences during the war. But as I said, we didn't have the opportunity to, as Adorno says, to come to terms with the past. And in this sense, if we can connect the heritage of the war, which are Sarajevo roses, some kind of digital data, we can address the reconciliation and talk more freely about the herbicide and genocide and all those subjects that are trying to be suppressed by the political authorities and try to be related to some kind of long ago past. It really has passed 30 years, but it's not trauma. It's not resolved. So.
Yeah. So your case is a kind of very direct or more clear suppression.
Yeah.
What about some of the things that are suppressed in some of the other? Some of your other projects. Yeah.
Thank you for your questions, and I think it's a difficult question because the archival artwork I just showed actually is Amir and I are still developing the work, and one of the challenge for us is that how we keep we keep thinking, how should we perceive our memories? And how should we perceive our experience? And how should we understand our experience? And because to us, memory is not just a fragmented, a single piece of the memory. It's a connected and accumulated memories. So how should we reflect the thinking within the archival artwork and connect the history, the people, and the communities, and also the site specificity within the project documentation? So to have a more holistic sense to the public. You know.
And sorry, is this? There we go. I think for the Arakawa Gins projects, when we're thinking about what it is that is being retained, and also when those moments of pause are happening during the preservation, that in these case studies was really driven by who the custodian is in any of these given moments. So where the project will pause or where access will pause will be determined by who it is that's looking after the pieces. And so the Bioscleve House being a privately commissioned artwork, effectively, had a complete lack of engagement for many years outside of those unique individuals that were residing within the space. And when those individuals weren't able to look after the piece any longer and they wanted to sell the work really just fell into disrepair, which was very unfortunate. We also saw modifications done to the work in order to get it up to code so it could be sold, which then changed the actual artwork itself. So it wasn't the way that the piece was intended by the artist. Then it was sold, and then the foundation was able to find the capital to take it back, which was fantastic. Interestingly, the pieces at the Mitaka Lofts, all of the residents who live in those spaces, who engage with those as their homes, have a completely different type of relationship with those spaces. Some of the residents have been there for 16 years plus, which is a pretty amazing environment to be living in for that long. And some of them have grown older during that period and have had to navigate what it is to walk in a space that has an undulating floor when they no longer have when they need assisted living, or having a child in a space like that as well. There's been many babies born in the Mitaka Lofts too. But then we also see in the municipal environments like Gifu, for Europark, that seemed to be the most successful, which I think is interesting to think about. Having more voices actually can be the most positive way of preserving these complex spaces.
Thank you.
Do you want to
Karen,
ask another?
I can, but do you have, is there something you want to say?
I mean, the thing I would add, I'm thinking about the suppression issue. In our projects, we have a lot of people, a lot of partners that are involved in that. Negotiation with the partners is often invisible, and I think that's a characteristic of public art often in general, is that you're negotiating, on multiple levels of relationships, and those relationships are very deterministic in terms of how you are able to move your project forward, but often those conversations are very invisible. And our challenge is actually to make them more explicit so that we are able to, extract, I don't know if that's the right word, but, have our partners actually contribute significantly to the work. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for all of those, but definitely to this last comment, I think actually in an odd way, if those prompts were available to people, they might actually connect, engage, whatever language you want to use with the works more directly. So bringing some of that invisible to the fore is important. I have another question, and then maybe we can open it up. I just want to be mindful of time. But it's about participation, and this shows up in a couple of the presentations. Definitely, you talked about it, Sylvia, and it threads through the others. And I think I'll lead with saying that the burden of participation. So more recently, so many of these projects are in zones, locales, territories that include minoritized persons, working class persons, et cetera. And I'm just wondering about the extra work or labor of stewarding, engaging, participating with these projects by people who are already quite burdened by labor. Who probably work more, who aren't part of a leisure class, a kind of strolling class, a flaneur class, so who are, on their way to be busy and to do things. And I'm just wondering about that, the ethos of that and the duress of labor and how these projects are actually asking something of people who are already pretty involved in that in other ways. Just wondering how we think about that, or how you think about that, or how that shows up in some of the cases.
Sure. I think that it's very interesting to think about for the work of Arikal Gins, the site in Euro Park specifically is actually meant to be a space of leisure for those that have a higher relationship with a working class environment, and they're living in an environment where there's a lot of industrial labor, factories, there's bigger families, and they needed spaces to go with those families as well. So the burden of the labor of maintenance has actually been transferred to the council and the local municipality in that project, which I think was a very astute and forward-thinking move on the part of the artists. And they were really interested in providing an environment that would be democratic and create the freedom of leisure that a lot of people who are in that or from that background don't necessarily have, especially when they're in more rural environments. The labor of having to look after the Mitaka lofts, as the residents do, is something that is straddled with the foundation as well. But that is more at the intersection of what it is to reside within an architectural space that is also an artwork, which I think is an interesting question in and of itself.
Our work is really, sort of focused on being responsive as possible to the community. So we're taking the work where people are. And so we'll do workshops in spaces that are convenient for folks and, gather those stories as we can, with a lot of it being driven by young people gathering that information. Ultimately, when the projects are opened, there's actually excitement to see one story, actually presented in the public realm. So I feel like that is a unique aspect of what we do is, bring our process to the folks in the community based on a deep understanding of those communities.
Taylor?
To me, I think I would consider my project as part of the many projects in the world. So everything is interconnected. And the question actually inspired me to think about how should we make a decision. And to me, there are many factors for us to make a decisions. We need to consider our positions within our context and also the value, meaning, and the influence to the others and ourselves from making these decisions. So everyone is like forming a spectrum. So everyone just take up the role that is they that is good for themselves and also have a positive influence to the others. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, we have 5 minutes. So do we have any questions from those of you who are in the audience? Anything? Yeah.
I have a question. Yes, going back to your question about documentation, it seems to me that some of the documentation you might generate will be documented in the future. I mean, I'm thinking about both the first and the last presentation, but also the experiences that people have in these public spaces and the memories that they dislodge, or that you were talking about the war traumas, which we'll hear about probably in the next generation. Not in this one, but are going to be very related to the roses that you presented, and also the stories of the LA citizens about, thinking about the riots from the past, but also what might be coming in the next project, and how these probably generate new documentation. My question really is, how are you preparing for future documentation which will influence the art that you are curating and conserving?
As I said, documentation is a little bit of a challenging issue because, it's, I think, being very clear about what it is you're documenting for, which is, I think, part of your question. We're gathering stories, hundreds of stories every year because we do, probably 10 of these projects a year. So what is it that you document, and how do you manage that documentation so that it is readable now and in the future? I feel like that is an area that's ripe for thinking, for this community-based work. I was talking to Dred Scott yesterday about museums and the important role that museums play in, sort of preserving and documenting, but how do you build that capacity, at the community level to really think about this and to do it in such a way that it's accessible to, the folks in the community to be able to build on for the future. I think one of the things that we do that is powerful is, engage young people in the process. And, just by way of one of the projects that we did, speaking of the 92 unrest, there was an exhibition at the California African American Museum on the 92 unrest. And we took, and generally our young people are high school age or, college. We took them to that exhibition. They had no knowledge of the 92 unrest. Which it was shocking to them, it was shocking to me. And so, just by nature of exposing them to, their community, you heard one of the young women say she learned about stuff about her community she never knew, which, is, I think, an investment in exactly what you're talking about.
I was going to say, I love some of the video posits of the community because people are named. I think one of the problems and troubles around documentation and photograph, again, I work in this too, so I'm thinking about this really actively myself, is often people aren't named. So there are shots of community, the project working with community, and there are children and people who are not named. And, that's in a way quite problematic going forward into the future as people become older and they show up online and with new media and technologies, and they're just part of a looming, big, huge, very non-specific, not particularized in any way. They are just the community and show how that worked with community. So yeah, we're at 1 minute. I don't know if there's anybody who has any. Oh, I see something back there. Should we try it? Okay, yeah. We'll go for it. It has to be very quick because we're at time.
My question is really about development and the problems that surround development, particularly of minoritized communities that where the development is largely not controlled by you. So my question is really both for Lejla and Karen, thinking about these spaces where minoritized people live and are subject to ongoing quote-unquote development to make these spaces more inhabitable for other reasons and other people, and how your work, could you speak to a little bit more about how your work acts as maybe memorializing these communities because you know that the change is coming and you can't stop it, or how what you're doing is an effort to resist that development in terms of like the larger development concepts that are at play around the world in places where people don't have a lot of power to resist.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question because the Heart of Hyde Park project was created in response to Metro, our public transportation authority building a light rail line above ground at the, to the consternation of the community. And so we were brought in to actually support the community in pushing back, by Metro actually, or sort of lifting up the community at a time when they felt very much under duress. Our work is really about empowering the community and giving them voice. And, that's what that project was about, giving them an opportunity to claim space on a bank, actually, in the midst of, feeling very, a lot of pressure, not only from the Metro, but from, development as a result of the Metro coming. It is challenging given the forces of real estate, which, we haven't talked very much about real estate in this symposium, but, it's one of the biggest challenges as public art workers in, just navigating the issues around homelessness, the value of property, et cetera. So, but ultimately our value is the louder the community's voice and the more empowered they feel, the more they can push back on that and, advance the issues that are, meeting their needs as opposed to the needs of the developers.
We are definitely getting our at time cue, so maybe we can continue the conversation at lunch. Thank you, all of you.
So welcome to today's session on nature and ephemerality, which is much more difficult to pronounce than it is to, I hope, understand in this session. We have five speakers today from north and south, east and west, which is great. And the first is Robert Lazarus from the University of Melbourne's Grimwade Centre for Cultural Materials Conservation. And he built his research projects at the intersection of digital and intangible heritage, teaches postgraduate courses on media and performance art conservation, and actively supports cross-cultural conservation projects. And I'll let Robert introduce his talk, which I'm very much looking forward to. Robert.
Hi there. So the title of today's presentation is Sand Sculptures of Northeast Arnhem. And I want to use this paper to think about how sand sculptures, and that's a term that I'll play around with, engage with the present when defined as public art. Come in. The aim is to consider what happens when I'm talking about Indigenous ritual spaces and Indigenous public memorials are recontextualised both as heritage sites and contemporary art, and who benefits. I begin by acknowledging the Dua and Yiddicha clans from Northeast Arnhem who host my research, and pay respect to the Dawango, Marta, and Mangalili clans, connected to this particular presentation, and specifically Yinamala Gumana, Jamboa Marawili and Balaka Maimaru, who intellectually guide this project, both as ceremonial leaders and, importantly for this, senior artists. So North East Arnhem Land is located in the very north of Australia, the green square, and the red, blue and purple dots represent the museums where sand sculptures have been transported from North East Arnhem Land to national and state museums. And I'll get onto that later. But this is the sort of map of my presentation. And the interesting thing is that the Arnhem Land in the north is considered a remote part of Australia, and then the museums on the east coast are considered settled or urban Australia. And for those who haven't been to Australia, this is a sort of kind of vast difference between these two spaces, the remote part of Australia and the settled part of Australia. And so we're talking about sand sculptures that move between those two zones. And interestingly, I guess from another perspective, is that these areas up north aren't remote at all. So Arnhem Land's closer to Milan than Melbourne or Sydney. It's just the way Australia was settled. So previous to European settlement, there was a lot of trade happening in Northern Australia with the rest of the world. But the European story is all about the east coast and the south. So sand sculptures are deeply rooted in Yolngu art and law, and they're persistent cultural sites, but also mobile installations for ceremonial events. Yolngu ceremonial leaders have ensured the continued reiteration of sand sculptures in ritual performances and protected heritage sites for thousands of generations without the assistance of any cultural policies. Sand sculptures are featured in major contemporary exhibitions in Australia. These gallery installations highlight the move by Yolngu people to link forms of heritage with installation art and layer the roles of ceremonial leadership with being a contemporary artist. My work began in this area in 2007, working for ceremonial leaders on documentation projects. So I was employed by the clan leaders of the area to document ceremonial production and create an archive on country that community could control, and this grew into a museum. And now working as an academic, I'm trying to find ways to continue to support Indigenous leaders who have to deal with a lot of cross-cultural contexts in universities and museums. And currently, leaders are exploring how to deal with heritage overlays in Arnhem Land and the different governmental structures that come with it, and trying to combine that with sand sculpture installations and performances in museum spaces. So what I'm trying to think about in this particular conference is the role public art can play in crossing or linking those two worlds. The beginning of this project began last year, and it started by getting Indigenous leaders recognised as experts and researchers. So it started with Jamboa getting an honorary doctorate at the end of last year, and also getting philanthropic support to pay Indigenous researchers to do work on country and not have to travel to Melbourne in order to be paid, or have to collaborate with academics in order to be paid, but for them to be able to do their own research through ceremonial pedagogy. The next stage was creating workshops on country, which develop, as you can see on the left and right, these sand sculpture memorials that are for Yolngu in their community, but also to educate visitors that come to Arnhem Land about where they're located and the beliefs and laws of that place. The third step in this project is to think about the pedagogy and performance practices that happen intergenerationally to conserve sand sculptures. And this requires bringing together different views. So from a heritage perspective, it's thinking about sand sculptures as this very important early form of design, something that Jung will talk about as preceding painting and preceding sculpture. Hence why sand sculpture might not be the right word for these types of artworks. The important thing to remember with Yolngu culture, which isn't the same across Australia, is that Yolngu haven't been removed from their ancestral lands. So they're still practicing cultural practices on their homelands, and they haven't been taken away by missions or government policies, and they remain on their land. So from a heritage perspective, sand sculptures are important from a Yolngu perspective. In terms of indigenous art, Yolngu art is collected all over the world. If you go to the Venice Biennale, you'll see a painting in the Arsenal of a sand sculpture by Ngami Meimaru. And so Yolngu art is heavily collected, and sand sculptures underpin a lot of the designs you see. And then also of relevance to the idea of sand sculptures as public art is the idea that Yolngu have a lot of power when it comes to politics. So they have a long history of standing up for land rights and sea rights in their community. So using public art to promote agency and promote control over their Yolngu worlds and governance is very important, and that's what museums are used for. So the sand sculptures that I've been showing in this presentation are all of a very specific type of public-facing sand sculpture. There's also sand sculptures that I wouldn't talk about in this context, but the public-facing ones are the ones that travel to museums. They have a history of linking different communities in Blue Mud Bay, and they also are connected by the song lines. So basically when there's funerals in Blue Mud Bay, the songs and the sand sculptures come together to connect the different clan members from different neighbouring regions. The important thing to think about as I sort of wind up is what happens when these sort of sand sculptures that are used for ritual performances, conserved intergenerationally, have a long, important history, move to the museum. What's happening? What kind of recontextualisation do we need to think about as conservators or historians or people just working in museums welcoming these works? And so what happens when Yolngu install sand sculptures in museums? You can see here some historical photos of different installations. As you can see, they also involve performance. And so it's not only about Yolngu taking over the museum with a sand sculpture, but also taking over the museum with song and dance. And this sort of disrupts the museum because it's no longer about written catalogues and painting and art history. It's about a different trajectory, a different history of cultural practice in Arnhem Land, and different language, obviously, through song, but also a performance-based pedagogy, which is something I'm trying to contend with this idea of public art and performance and how they fit together. I feel like sand sculptures connect to this idea of public art, but how does the ceremonial performance that accompanies sand sculptures fit into this idea? And here you can see some different installation shots. And here's another installation shot. And you can kind of see what's happening here potentially, but I'll explain it. Basically, Yolngu are insisting on sand sculptures in the museum. So the museum wants to host Indigenous paintings, and the Yolngu are saying, if you want to host our paintings, you need to also host our ceremonial song and dance and sculptures as part of their curatorial intervention. So it is this interesting cross-cultural space and this kind of interface that happens between sand sculptures and paintings. And so the important thing to think about for me is really, if Yolngu want to promote their practices with museums and with conservation professionals and curators, is public art a better way of talking about this sort of practice that moves between Arnhem Land and between, the floorboards of museums? Is that a more productive way for Yolngu to think about their practice? And for people who are supporting them in museums and different institutions, is public art a better way to think about it than as this idea of an ephemeral sand sculpture, which, as you can see from the category of this session, is kind of associated maybe with nature or land art and intangible heritage, whereas for Yolngu, these are permanent, ongoing installations. They're not temporal. They need to be reiterated, but they're constant. And there's also just an interesting thing just to finish on, is this tension between recognising Yolngu as ceremonial leaders with the sand sculptures and recognising them as senior artists with the paintings. And so just to finalise, can we think about Yolngu heritage as public art? I'm over time now. Cool, that's it.
So we move from Southern Hemisphere back to the Northern Hemisphere with the next speaker, Vele, who comes from the Middelheim Museum. Vele is the head of collections at the Middelheim Museum in Belgium, and she holds an MA in art history and a master's in conservation of monuments and landscapes. She's worked in the heritage field, mainly for the public sector in Belgium and the Netherlands, and a common thread to her research and work is a values-based and holistic approach to natural and cultural heritage. So, welcome, Vele.
Thank you, Austin, and the public for having me here in this super inspirational conference. I welcome you to this brief journey through the intersection of public art, of nature and well-being at the Middelheim Museum, which is in Antwerp, Belgium, in Europe. In 1910, the city of Antwerp decided to create an immense public park by merging former military grounds and 3 private aristocratic domains. Responding to the suffocating urban conditions of the time, the city sought to preserve the lungs of Antwerp. In this green sanctuary, nature could nourish the well-being of the city's residents. But however, concern was expressed that at the time, the masses, in particularly working-class people in the city, would not consider nature as a safe public space, had lost connection with plants and trees, and would not feel welcome in these formerly exclusive gardens. Here is Middelheim Park in the interwar period. In the background, you see 2 women wearing aprons there. I guess servants may be relaxing on a break. And I wonder if the presence of an armed policeman with a Hercule Poirot moustache helped feeling particularly relaxed. Central in the image is a vase on a pedestal. To ensure that people felt welcome and safe, art objects in particular were considered important in nature. Such as this fountain of dancing nymphs, happy, airy, energetic. Sculptures were carefully selected to help rebuild connections between the people and nature, contributing to the well-being of city residents. Fast forward to 1950, an ambitious international exhibition of modern sculpture marked the reopening of the restored park after severe war damage. 150,000 visitors went to see the summer show, which was inspired by international exhibitions in London and Sonsbeek, but also by notions concerning the need for post-war healing of the city residents and distraction. The success of the event led to the establishment of a permanent museum that same year, pioneering the concept of a permanent public collection of modern and contemporary sculpture in the open-air setting of a free public park. And my paper touches on the complexities and impact of this musealization process. It's difficult, but today I will put it very simple. Public art in 1910 seemed subordinate to public nature in urban policies on well-being, and now the shift from the 1950s to art museum reverses this view, making the park subservient to the needs of art. Middelheim was dedicated to presenting an international art historical overview of sculpture, and the park was now seen as a green museum building, a passive backdrop of vegetation that needs design, especially for modern art. And so constructions and pavilions popped up, and plantings were subordinate, scenography. Each sculpture needed its ideal background. In the 20th century, the autonomy of the individual artwork and freedom of placement by artists or museum staff seemed paramount. And to give one example, in 1993, a new permanent work was installed in one of the most biodiverse areas with a rare swamp vegetation. In the picture left, you see fake grass mats around the super clean floating concrete platform. But despite intensive and incredible conservation efforts, nature took over rapidly. A walkway had to be built because people complained they got wet feet. And the artists and curators were dissatisfied with the brown biofilm and growing weeds, naturally, you would say. In conservation, art and nature were often framed as conflicting, as opposing. And around 2000, this dual identity of art museum on the one hand and park at the other seemed disconnected, if not actually at war. A case in point is this artwork also, Mama by Jeffriess. Metal rings were installed on 200-year-old beech trees. In 2001, it symbolized the perfect marriage between art and nature, but it was soon the subject of community protest because the works were nailed into the trunks, and as the trees grew, the rings suffocated the trees. Under pressure from park services, the artwork ended up in museum storage. Second attempt was made by reinstalling with wooden pegs, but as the beeches grew, the rings had to be moved up every year with heavy machinery on their fragile roots and impacting incredibly on the conservation team. So this marriage was not viable on the longer term, was ignoring the growth and the needs of one partner, of nature, leading to loss of significance for the artwork in the end. Now fast forward to 2023, Mama is reinstalled in the same lane, but on oaks, which grow much more slowly, and in close collaboration with 3 specialists and metal object restorers, the rings have been adapted as not to disturb the flow of sap. And this case illustrates also an important shift to the present and future Milan Museum, embracing this hybrid nature-culture identity. And my paper will try to examine in greater depth the major changes now in acquisitions, in commissioning, in presentation, and in conservation. The adoption of a values-based heritage place approach as a museum and a formal assessment of the park's cultural and natural significance have been pivotal in this journey. In addition, audience research revealed that the park's dual identity as park and museum, which the museum sector saw as our biggest problem in the 20th century, was not only reconcilable, but was our unique selling proposition. Milan Museum was the only museum in Belgium that remained open continuously during the pandemic. It combined 2 things that can help people strengthen their resilience. It's free access to a green space and free access to all for inspiring and creative ways of seeing the world through art. So a chance to talk about something other than the virus. And our new museum mission affirms its contribution to a healthy urban environment and also to different UN Sustainable Development Goals throughout all museum functions. Of course, contemporary artists help us imagine sustainable futures, for example, by creating alternatives for tangible and material collections. Wendy Morris's research on women's knowledge of botany led to a public procession honoring plants and botanists involving local communities. And our first augmented reality artwork for the collection, The Pleasure Garden, hopes to influence our view of nature in a more inclusive way. Milan Museum also reimagined its approach to collection presentation. Understanding the distinct characteristics and values of each landscape zone in the park provided a blueprint for regrouping the sculptures. Thematic relocations hope to provoke reflection on the interdependency and changing relationships of humans and non-humans and nature. The multidisciplinary curatorial team sought to develop and protect the rights of art, people, and nature together. I'll give you a quick glimpse into this new arrangement. The core site is now devoted to nature-culture hybrids. Then we have a romantic landscape zone, and their sculptures elicit questions about the ideal of an urban wilderness and also our imagination of nature in town. There's a more formal garden, and that regroups works on the theme of human nature. And a surrounding zone is devoted to movement, not to artistic ones, but to natural cycles that so strongly affect every experience in the park, day and night, the seasons. They also determine almost all our museum processes, especially conservation. Since the start, the museum had to pioneer the management of considerable risks to sculptures caused by the exposure to the elements and wildlife. Climate change causes today a great deal of damage to our art park. Today, the vulnerability of nature itself and strengthening its resilience has become a theme in our renewed interdisciplinary collaboration in conservation. So caring for both the green, the blue, and the built and the art, heritage and the art elements. The new presentation freed up space in the park, and Milan extended its open-air storage on site, not by building storages, but by removing old roads, softening soil, and massive planting, contributing to biodiversity. I think we went carbon negative in this museum storage, although this rewilding of our museum practices also elicits strong opinions. We're sharing this open-air storage with other organizations to store and conserve public art, for instance, art in the city that is dismantled, temporary or permanent for various reasons, or with the Flemish community. As a natural habitat of a public collection, this accessible space, contrary to a traditional museum storage which is closed off, underlines its very public nature. I'd like to conclude with a project that takes us back to our roots, to the beginning of my story, the redevelopment of a park zone in co-creation with the patients and caretakers from the adjacent psychiatric hospital. Together we hope to develop our hybrid ecosystem of green inclusive spaces and of great public art, and not only to contribute to the better physical and mental recovery of our neighbors, but also to a greater quality of life for Antwerp citizens in general and for recharging batteries of all of our visitors. So please do come and visit us, and then maybe we can continue our discussions on so many aspects, also on decolonizing and other issues that we are struggling with. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. So we can go even further north for our next presentation by Kati Oates, who has a position of the Curator of Public Art in the city of Tallinn in Estonia. She has studied and worked in Helsinki, as well as Vienna and New York, with a focus on social justice in the intersections of art and public spaces.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. My name is Kati Ots. I'm the Curator of Public Art at the Tallinn Strategic Management Office in the capital of Estonia, Tallinn. And I'm going to give you a short glimpse into what's going on in the public art field of Tallinn right now. But first of all, a short overview of the structure I work at, because I think it's quite unique in a way. The Tallinn Strategic Management Office was created 3 years ago, as was my position. And the position of a curator of public art is very unique in Estonia. It's the only permanent position like that. And there are also no public art offices, etc. So just to know what's the current situation like. And I work in a team of urban design and planning. So there are 12 architects and city planners, and then there's me. So I can give art input to the projects that my team is working on. And my work involves strategic planning, project management, competitions, procurements, consulting, coordinating, etc. One of the biggest challenges we are facing is shifting mindsets. When we think about public art in Estonia, this is what people usually picture. So it's a very conventional, figurative bronze monument depicting a man. I guess there are a lot of reasons. I'm not an art historian, but I think one of the things is that our history was from occupation to occupation. So I guess this is a try to overwrite or rewrite our own history now. But of course, this is not actually a democratic process. And a discriminating one as well. And another obstacle it creates is that artists, especially contemporary artists, are rather mistrusting of the city because the view on public art is so narrow-minded. So how to build that trust again is also a challenge. And as I mentioned sustainability in the title of my work, then this, I think, is also directly related to this. If we're talking about the use of materials or also the process, the transparency of it, etc. And also the work that is, well, one thing is producing things, but the other is also saying no to things or putting a stop to some processes as well. So one of the first things we did was create this communication tool. So to introduce what is public art, what are we talking about when we're talking about contemporary public art, we created these 10 very simple keywords with visuals illustrating some public artworks that have been done in Tallinn. They haven't been initiated by the city, only 2 permanent ones, but just to give an idea. So these are transparency, collaboration with experts, holistic public space, versatility, equality, sustainability, care and maintenance, accessibility, local engagement, and communication. Another thing was to try to get an overview of the existing public artworks. We didn't have a comprehensive overview as the information was scattered around different city districts, different city departments, etc. So we are in the process of gathering this information, and we have also launched an online public map. An English version will be launched soon as well. But this helps us to communicate and cherish the public art we already have and also plan the future artworks. What I also want to point out is that we do have one consistent procedure for commissioning public art, contemporary public art. This is on a state level, the Percent for Art principle. We are planning to pilot it on our municipal level as well. But anyhow, before starting with our project, this is something that we look to, because it was a huge step forward, launching this a bit over 10 years ago, but over the years it has received a lot of criticism. So we are trying to acknowledge it and learn from it as much as we can. I guess this is quite familiar to you as well, but what it includes, for example, is artists' unpaid labor and bureaucracy, limited artistic freedom, decorative function, artists' financial responsibility, and art follows architecture. Now, on the one hand, I am critical of this art following architecture, but in my work, actually, art follows infrastructure. So there are restrictions, but I also try to see the possibilities in that. So the first project that we did that materialized was in the framework of Pollinator Highway. This is a green corridor in Tallinn going through the whole city. It was used by the pollinators, and now pollinators used it to move from one green area to another. And now we are trying to support this environment to make it more comfortable for people also to use, to walk, to cycle, etc., just to keep it a green area, a green space, and a car-free zone. And also I have to address the funding. So European Union has funded quite a few of these projects I'm talking about, as well as this. And we were able to do an installation competition here. The input for this came from an anthropological research that we carried out to listen to the needs of the local people. The 3 key words we took from it, site specificity, environmental consciousness, and community engagement. We tried to be very experimental with this installation competition to, as I mentioned, those conventional monuments, then this is something totally different. And also with the procurement procedures, we tried to be as innovative as possible. So with conditions for applying. We tried to be as flexible as possible. We also had an international jury that we hadn't had before. We also had an online public voting available. As you can see on the visual, this is what you saw on the online voting website. We did the communication in 3 languages. The budget for the installations were very, very tight, but they were also meant to be temporary, so only for 1 year. Here we can see the opening of these installations. The authors were architecture and urbanist studies students from the Estonian Academy of Arts, and also there was a duo of an architect and urbanist, so no artists, as you can understand. We were happy to receive some nominations on some competitions, which was a huge support as I mentioned, the piloting and experimental form of this competition. Here you can see one of the works. It actually consisted of 3 separate installations, so authors were super ambitious. They used reed, which is a traditional building material in Estonia, and they created these minimal playful forms for people, but also inside the reed straws, insects could hibernate and use it as a habitat. Straw Chapel was a community-built pavilion, also using traditional building material in Estonia. And Interspecies Crossing was a landmark for non-human creatures, and this was built out of linen, lichen, hemp, etc. As you can see, some vandalism also occurred, but I would say we can be quite happy with the result in the sense that they were up for almost a year as intended, and well, vandalism is inevitable. And the authors of the Straw Chapel are planning to restore those ruins as well, so looking forward to that. And the other project I wanted to mention is the Green Tracks installation competition. It's very similar to the previous one, but here we went to the seaside. Here on the picture you can see Linnahall, which is a Soviet brutalist landmark building in Estonia. It's not in use anymore, but the area around it has a lot of potential, so we wanted to activate it more. We did some tactical urbanism and also an installation competition. I will show you the top 3 works. This is a 3rd place. This is a barley gallery. This is also a traditional grain in Estonia, and they had a strong emphasis on public programming, like barley porridge Sundays, etc. Here is Las Algas, a seaweed pavilion that wanted to use the local seaweed from the sea and experiment with it. And although we will not execute this work, then we are collaborating with this author to do some experiments with seaweed. And the 1st place went to City Machine, which offers a postmodern approach in relation to Linnahall, and it uses residual materials at the site, including literal pieces of Linnahall that are just laying around the area. And to conclude, there are a lot of challenges ahead. For example, when I'm here talking about sustainable material use and installations, it has been very focused on architects, or like architects have been very interested in these competitions, but now we are thinking about how to also engage artists, how to accommodate their needs, and I guess they need more maybe process-based approach, individual approach, also more resources, more time, and more money. So these are the challenges that I'm looking forward to facing. So thank you. That's it.
So this brings us to the last presentation. We have 2 speakers. We have Caroline and Brianna, who are coming from Los Angeles, and I'll introduce first Caroline, who is a civic art project manager with the LA County Department of Arts and Culture. Previously, she served as Deputy Director of Prospect 3 Biennial, founded director of the Outside Art Fair, was co-owner of the Viewing Room and Kerrigan Campbell Art and Projects, New York City, and associate producer at Michael Blackwell Productions. And Brianna is working together with Caroline. She's a civic art program specialist, again with the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, and they're going to give the presentation together.
Imagine you are visiting Athens Park in South Los Angeles. You decide to enter this park restroom, and this is what you hear. This self-cleaning, automated restroom is part of the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Recreation's pilot program called Project Restroom. The goal is to provide safe and accessible restrooms in county parks in areas with people living in poverty. These restrooms come with a sound system and speakers installed, and audio files that can be programmed to go on and off after a certain period of time. This fall, 2 of the restrooms will be installed, one in Athens Park and one in Atlantic Avenue Park in East Los Angeles. The Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture received funding for this project through the county's civic art policy that allocates 1% of design and construction costs from eligible capital projects for civic art. When we received the funding for this project, we got together with Parks and decided to commission 2 site-specific sound pieces for the 2 restrooms. The Sound Art Restrooms project is the first of 2 sound art projects currently underway with the department. We teamed up with Label Curatorial, an art consulting team who did extensive community engagement in the community last fall, visiting local schools, libraries, attending community meetings, and talking to park visitors, asking, what is your favorite musical instrument? How do you come to the park? Why do you come to the park? What is your favorite or least favorite sound that is not considered music? What sounds do you associate with the park? Here is a sample of some of the responses that we received. We gathered these responses and sent the community feedback to the 2 commissioned artists to help them shape their compositions. Michaela Session, the director of the Pan-African People's Orchestra, was selected for the Athens Park project, and Christopher Garcia, a multi-instrumentalist from Los Angeles, was selected for the Atlantic Avenue Park project. This composition that you're hearing by Michaela is just an initial version. He will be layering it with sounds from the community and the park, but he did want us to play it so that you could get a sense of what the final version would sound like. The Pan-African People's Orchestra was founded in 1961 by Horace Tapscott in South Central Los Angeles. The goal of the orchestra is to provide music for Black people by their own community members. And the mission of the Pan-African People's Orchestra is to preserve the work of Black composers, living and past.
LA County has over 600 permanent artworks in its civic art collection, and yet the Sound Art Restrooms project that Caroline just shared with us, and another project which we will describe shortly, are the first sound artworks to be commissioned. In surveying the field, we found this is not so uncommon. For example, LA Metro Arts Agency has a collection of 194 pieces and only 2 sound artworks, while the San Francisco Arts Commission has a collection of 4,000 artworks with only 4 sound pieces. So why is sound art not as commonly commissioned for permanent public art projects? Well, we've learned there are some common misconceptions that can get in the way. For one, project stakeholders tend to think that sound art is too expensive to produce and technologically challenging to maintain. When in fact we found that sound art is generally less expensive to produce than other public art projects, is easy to operate, and if the technology does degrade, can be easily updated. It can suit a variety of environments where visual art might be harder to place and can offer greater accessibility for different audiences, such as the visually impaired. Still, there is often an assumption that sound art is not appropriate for the project site. Public art is often situated in busy environments such as parks and subways, where the existing noise level is thought to not be conducive to sound art for both practical and safety reasons. While in quieter areas like libraries, sound art is assumed to be often invasive, irritating, or hard to contain. And these sentiments are part of a larger narrative about the perceived negative impact of sound in urban spaces, where sound has historically been considered as noise or something that pollutes the environment. For decades, policymakers have sought to mitigate noise out of a concern for public health, creating city noise maps, action plans, and quiet areas. But this seems to be changing. Here, the term soundscape, popularized by composer R. Murray Schafer in the 1970s, is useful as it considers everything that can be heard at a particular place and moment in time to be part of the acoustic environment. In this way, harmony in urban design can be achieved not just by muffling certain unpleasant noises, but amplifying other pleasing ones as well. In the Sound Considered City, researchers make the case that sound is an essential part of placemaking, where artists should be empowered to positively recompose the city through sound art. And as they point out, whether sound artists are specifically tasked with improving the sonic environment or not, the effects of their artworks still positively add to a city's character and residents' well-being. These challenges aside, many stakeholders still tend to prioritize visual art. Oh, I think we lost. Still tend to prioritize visual art and question if sound art is even art. So what exactly is sound art, and how does it differ from noise on the one extreme and music on the other? Well, the first sound artist often cited was Italian futurist Luigi Russolo, who rejected classical music for the sounds of modern city life, specifically embracing the noise of trams, car engines, and crowds. He published his manifesto, The Art of Noises, in 1913 and designed a series of noise machines here in Milan for his concerts, which attempted to approximate the frenzy of the industrial age. By the 1950s, sound art as an aesthetic category gained more prominence following John Cage's experimental composition, 433. Ostensibly 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, the piece may be better thought of as a durational time bucket filled with the ambient noises of the audience, their confused whispers and anxious movements, which contribute essential elements to the composition. Then in the late 70s, composer Max Neuhaus became interested in sculpting the oral experience. Located in the vent ducts of New York's Times Square, his artwork almost completely blends in with the noise of the city if you're not paying attention. And that's exactly what the artist intended. Neuhaus wanted to explore the ways in which his work could be encountered in an unmediated way, drawing people's attention into the environment through a kind of perceptual tuning, where the listener gradually becomes more aware of sensory space. Embracing this artwork is not about seeing, but feeling. Neuhaus later described music as temporal and sound art as spatial, stating that his artwork does not exist in time. I've taken sound out of time and made it into an entity. So today the field is obviously much more diverse, expansive, and varied, positioning itself as a multimodal phenomenon, according to Walker Downey, by challenging us to look, feel, and think as much as listen. But much of what sound art does share in common is that it asks us to pay attention, to drop into the present moment and attune to the environment around us.
Imagine you are on the campus of the Harbor UCLA Medical Center for a doctor's visit. You enter the inpatient lobby out of breath and stressed, and you find a place to sit down. You hear a sound. This is a composition by extreme vocalist and sound artist Carmina Escobar, and it's the second sound project currently underway in our department. Harbor UCLA is a public teaching hospital located in Carson, California. It's the only level 1 trauma center in South Los Angeles, and it serves some of the neediest patients in the county. The campus is currently undergoing a huge renovation that will be completed by 2027. Civic Art received 1% for the arts funding for the project, and artist Jamie Sholnick was commissioned to do a project in the inpatient lobby. In doing research for her project, Jamie spent months researching and driving around the neighborhood. She immediately realized that the neighborhood was park poor, with large swatches of commercial districts, fast food restaurants, and strip malls. She also came across a tiny park located only 6 minutes from the hospital called the Bixby Marshland. This Bixby Marshland is a tiny remnant of a marshland that once covered the entire area. Los Angeles County has lost 99% of its marshlands due to development. But hardly anyone knows about this park because it's run by the sanitation department, and it's only open 1 day a month for 4 hours. Jamie realized that she really should draw in the natural environment from the parkland into the lobby through her artwork. So she, and in turn to reconnect the patients and staff with nature. So she created a collage using photographs from the Bixby, layered with drawings and paintings, and the piece is titled Marshlands. It will be translated into glass by Franz Meyer of Munich and will be installed behind the reception desk. She also decided to collaborate with sound artist Carmina Escobar on her project's community engagement and to enlist Carmina to compose a sound piece that would be in dialogue with her artwork in the lobby via a sound shower, and that would also pull in the marshland using the environmental sounds of the marshland. Carmina and Jamie have been organizing a series of healing workshops at the Bixby and performances at the hospital. The events at the Bixby are called Nature and Art as Medicine, and they include workshops on our relationship with the voice, ways of listening, and teas brewed from natural and medicinal plants. Carmina's sound artwork will be composed of recordings from her hospital performances, chorals from the workshops, and natural sounds from the Bixby. She will use an editing program that will translate Jamie's imagery into sound, creating a spectrogram that is a sound interpretation of Jamie's artwork. Visitors will be able to experience the sound piece by sitting on a chair, and either a sensor will activate the piece or they will be able to push a button to experience it. A pendant speaker will be located overhead and will deliver the sound piece via a sound shower.
So in closing, we just wanted to leave you all with a short clip of an encounter that we captured between artist Carmina Escobar and a patient at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. Thank you.
I'd like to congratulate our tech team on really fabulous integration with those sound art pieces. I was really worried, but you've proved me wrong. Please, could we have speakers back to the... this is the last speaker. It is. Yes, so it's time for us questions. I'm going to start off. Please take your seats wherever you like. So I'm going to start with a question which is really my interest, but also, I think, topical with this whole conference, which is about conservation and preservation. I'll start with Robert. And I was curious about how you go about documenting the outdoor monumental sand art and how that can help in perhaps the future conservation or preservation of these important works.
Oh yeah, cool. Well, interestingly, the whole project began around documentation. So in 2007, Yongo... Is this better? Yeah, so documentation was actually a meeting place between my expertise, which was in media production, and your expertise, which was in performance production. Yongo did a lot of cinematography, editing, archiving. I didn't have the skills to do both things. I only had the skills to support one type of specialisation. And so documentation was this interesting meeting place for ceremonial leaders to invite academics into the Yongo worldview. So if you expand documentation to being more than just a written cultural practice, but an oral cultural practice, then there is, a lot of interesting things that can happen, in an archive, but also just in terms of trying to work in a productive way with Yongo. So basically the documentation involves Yongo producing songs, producing performances, producing these ceremonial events as leaders, as directors, as performers, curating the whole situation. And then sometimes academics are invited to support that financially and technically. And that's a long history going back to the 30s of anthropologists and linguists and ethnographers, musicologists who were invited into this ceremonial space to do their specialty, which was documentation, a white man's kind of dreaming. And, trying to combine different ways of seeing archives and different ways of seeing history and different ways of seeing how knowledge systems are maintained. But the important thing, I guess, from my perspective is that my relationship started as an employee of the ceremonial leaders. So I was living I was a neighbour living in Yokala, working full-time in their museum and archive, working for them, not working for a university or a museum. So my access and my job description was completely controlled by the ceremonial leaders. So I just did a lot of documentation, and the archive is now huge. It's a huge archive. So ceremony is a document generating machine. And so, yeah, I guess the answer to your question is have a very broad approach to documentation and think about it beyond perhaps your training and beyond your institutional practice.
It's very useful to think about, especially in the context of documenting for Kati the works. And you mentioned sustainability and materials, but how do you plan future conservation in thinking about Estonian public art?
With those installations, we had a totally different approach, that they were very consciously temporary, and also already in the installation competition documents, we stated that, first of all, the artists or the authors are responsible for the maintenance for 1 year, and they have to include it in their budget, and they also need to repurpose or recycle the materials. So that was a very intentional goal. And with maintenance, and also I wanted to say that it was very conscious to have this project very low budget, so that there would be less damage and less loss and less sort of that argumentation that we are wasting taxpayers' money if something happens. So as it's a first pilot, and then it would have it could have a very hurtful feedback afterwards. Yeah, but then again, I think vandalism is inevitable, it's a part of the process, etc. But yeah, regarding conservation, this is not my department, but just when we're talking about conserving public art in Estonia, then the first thing that pops into my head is the topic of Soviet monuments and Soviet symbols in public space, so this is a very relevant discussion right now. But this is happening on state level, and universities are doing research on it, etc. So yeah, and it's very political as well. So yeah.
I think conservation is always political. This is a good segue to Verli, because you come from a museum context, and I'm interested how the approaches to conservation has evolved and how that impacts the decision to store or conserve, and especially thinking also about what you just said, Kati, the costs involved can sometimes be very, very large when works don't last as long or age as elegantly as they may have been planned.
Yes, thank you for that question. It could be a very long answer, but because we have this old history, and in the beginning the idea was, well, these collections should be in stone and bronze and last forever, but that has changed a lot, also because museum standards did not work, where best practices were not fit, because you can see changes even in so-called sustainable materials within weeks. Paint is colors. So in conservation, we shift, the approach has shifted to preserving values or managing the change of values, and also thinking about repeatability or replacing parts. So sometimes we acquire works that are super temporary in material, but they have a longevity in the long term, because first of all there's then a protocol, artist interview, and you discuss how it can be repeated, like after 50 years, because we're investing public money as a museum. So acquisition strategies now involve our voices from conservators, and like replacing textiles. And another thing which is also typical, I think, for conservation in my museum or art park, is that we need incredible networks of people who care and who can sustain this work. So it's not only the work by the museum, it's work by tree specialists, but also volunteers, gardeners, neighbors. It needs these networks of care, and I think it's also one of the greatest parts of my job, just taking care of each other, but of art and of nature. So that's also super important. So yeah, and then storing. Of course, some of the works went to closed storage because for instance, they are rare 1960s sculptures in very early polyester or like a Giacometti. We're not putting it anymore outside. But recent acquisitions have completely changed then, and this open storage now is, yeah, as I said, it's been in discussion because some people say this is not what I expect from a museum. It looks neglected. There are bees, there are pests, so it's a big change. And people also come to us and ask, why are these in storage and why others not? And then there are topics like, why are the nudes now in storage? What about the colonial heritage? So but I think these are great topics to discuss. So I prefer open storages for that reason too.
Brilliant, thank you. So we'll move to the last speakers for a question about. I have two questions, and you can decide which to answer. Who will answer which? So, how have you worked? I mean, you mentioned a bit the working together with sound and imagery artists. So, I was wondering also about how you foster the relationship between the two artists. And the second question is, how have you documented the artist's intentions for sound art versus the murals in the hospital?
Well, so working together with the artists. In particular, the project at Harvard UCLA includes a visual artist and a sound artist. So that's a relationship that Jamie, who is the visual artist, she knew about Carmina and wanted to work with her. So we didn't really foster the relationship. It sort of evolved, and it's still evolving because this project is still underway. But we work with them with the workshops that they're doing and the community engagement and the performances in the hospital, and we help facilitate all of those activities. But but Jamie has hired Carmina as sort of like as like a subcontractor, sort of. Yeah, and I'm going to let Brianna take the other question.
Yeah, thanks so much. So your question about just how we're working to document the intentions of sound artists' work, and I mean, it's the simple short answer is that, you know, as we mentioned in the talk, these are our first sound art projects commissioned, so it will be an evolving process. But that being said, we have quite a, you know, robust system for how we work with artists and how we document their work for our other public art projects. And so, you know, I think off the top, you know, we'll go through the typical channels of videography, photography, you know, fact sheets, conservation and collections, documentation. But I think one thing that we try to bring into all of our work, at the center of our work, is really in this effort to work well with artists, you know, we want to be in constant conversation with them about how they feel about their work, what its intentions are, and how we can do our best as stewards to really integrate that into the way we work. And so as a team, you know, we're not only made up of project managers, but there's a collections and conservation team with their own needs. There is a fiscal team. They're looking at the project slightly differently. So we do our best to really communicate well and think about not just, you know, how the artists might, or how we might help the artists through their artwork statement and description, but also, like, how can we communicate that in a way that serves a general public, and how can we get the information that we need from their project to satisfy the needs of our conservation and collections team, and how can, you know, so it's thinking about an artist's intentionality through multiple vantage points, and through each of those lenses, there's different information that we need to pull and think about and uplift, and I think that we really strive to do that and through everything, so.
So I'm going to let the audience ask more questions than I hope. We've got 2.5 minutes, but actually we're going to extend that because we started 10 minutes late. So please, I see your hand, but I also see one in the back. So let's Karen first.
What's your name?
Robert?
Robert, yes, sorry. I thought it was so interesting how the indigenous leaders went into the gallery space and really tried to remake the gallery space in their context so that they were comfortable, as opposed to, you know, so often those spaces are like so foreign and uncomfortable that, you know, you wonder if you want to even be in them as an artist. So that was fascinating to me that they really had that wisdom to try and, you know, transform it so that it was more their space instead of the space of the gallery.
Yeah, there's a really interesting history of mediating different tools and technologies for Yolngu power. So, you know, in some cultures, obviously, there's this idea that, you know, you need to focus on just what's happening locally and maintaining control over your own institutions. But there is this belief in Yolngu culture where you actually need to extend the network if you're a leader, and you need to occupy other spaces and build this idea of a Yolngu network, or like allies and people to trade with and so forth. And it comes back to this ancestral beliefs that there was this ancestral spirit who would bring all the tools and technologies from around the world to Yolngu, and Yolngu would mediate those technologies and create power for their own communities. And so that's given leaders this sort of platform in which to see everything as a medium Yolngu are waiting to use. But it's also, you know, this idea that in the 50s, Yolngu would visit different museums around the world and see them as the one place where maybe their culture could be sort of seen in a valued way. So there is a sort of value creation process as well, where curators were actually interested, whereas when you all turn up to Parliament House and do a large performance, the politicians are very uncomfortable. So there's different spaces they've tried to occupy, and, you know, a pat on the back for museums, that is the space that they've been most successful or managed to occupy in the most immersive way.
So a question from the back.
Hi, my question is for Caroline and Brianna. I really appreciated in your presentation that you really highlighted how sound art is an essential part of placemaking. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak a bit more to strategies around stakeholder buy-in for sound art over visual art. Just for a little bit more context, there's a current development project that I'm working on that's in a very, you know, the landscape architects kind of are wanting to preserve a lot of the natural ecosystem, but then there's like a whole city center that's being built there, a lot of new developments of apartments, but it's also on like unceded territories of our local Coast Salish First Nations, Musqueam. And so part of the preliminary public art plan, we had integrated a small sound pavilion that could be used not only for different rotating sound art exhibitions, but could really center Indigenous revitalization of their languages. And a lot of the different stakeholders, from developers to even other municipal departments and parks, they were very much against the idea. And of course, like, there was no design that was fleshed out. It would be very much artist-centered in terms of how it would happen. But what I find, though, is it's hard to get stakeholder buy-in in sound art as a form of public art. You know, like, you hear things like, oh, why not just put a music room in the community center that's going to go up? It's like, well, this is not necessarily a music room. This is supposed to be like a sound intervention. So I was just wondering if you guys could speak more to strategies around stakeholder buy-in.
Well, this was less of a problem with the Sound Art Restrooms project. We went out in the community, and the community seemed to love the idea in talking to people and in talking to the community groups. With Harbor UCLA, we have encountered some resistance to the idea. As Brianna was laying out, stakeholders sometimes feel like they want to see a more traditional form of public art, something that's visible. And so we have been doing a series of demos on site, and we're going to continue into the summer with Carmina setting up a sound shower in Harbor UCLA so that but staff and the community can experience what a sound shower is like and what it will be like. You know, perhaps because it's paired with a visual artwork, it will be less difficult to convince people of the validity of the sound art. But so that's one thing I suggest, is maybe doing some sort of demonstrations.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that, you know, because the medium is experiential, I think if you can sort of build in that idea into the relationship building, of sort of like slowly building up the relationship and giving the stakeholders an experience little by little of sort of what the piece could be or what the total outcome could be. And so as Caroline was saying, you know, sort of the way we've kind of worked with some of the staff has been just slowly introducing the concept and then giving them exposure to, like, you know, test models, how it could look, how it could feel. And then I think just more generally, like, anytime you're trying a more experimentative, risk-taking approach, it's important to, you know, number one, really listen to the concerns, and then just move slowly, you know, as they say, at the speed of trust. You can't just, you know, have things happen overnight. You have to get people comfortable with something that's new. And so I think we've been also really lucky to work with stakeholders who've been, you know, really open, and you know, you can't, you can't force anyone to be that. But it's been a give and take. But I think just moving in that direction has been helpful.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
So this will be the last question, and we have a photo op. So.
Okay, this question really is for anyone on the panel. Because you all are dealing with nature, I couldn't help but see also the ties between sacredness and the sanctity of life, of people, land. So how are you, in your processes, holding that, like the sacredness of the religion, sounds, the earth? Is that a part of your process as you're navigating public art and earth?
Maybe Lejla and Kati, can you answer that?
Maybe someone else is better.
Thank you for that question. I think, I think one of the journeys we went through now is by acknowledging and seeing that we are part of nature, and that this distinction between us, between people and the environment, or art and the environment, is something to reconsider. Like also ecofeminist theories have been strong also in changes in the museum. So it now navigates the respect for earth and for nature on the place that we are, even if it is a very Anthropocene environment. It has been worked on, this environment, since the 9th century. There were farmers there, so the work has been worked on. But even for choosing a location where to put art, or does it impact the soil, or does it... so we do consider earth and non-human forms even before relocating now public art and thinking about alternatives also, because this park is already so full and nature has been pushed into a corner. So yeah, I think, but maybe others can give a better answer.
Jamie, who was doing the project at Harbor UCLA, with her idea of bringing nature into that environment, what we've done is we have gone into the Bixby and done event. As I was saying, we've organized these events there, and we've offered tours with a naturalist, Lisa Fermani from LMU, who's given tours to the attendees, but who are also attending the workshops, and she has. Lectured about for an appreciation of the marshlands and the birds that are native to this environment and the plants that are native to the environment, for example. That's one of the things that we've done.
Yeah, and I would just say, adding to that, when Jamie and Carmina started their community engagement, I think exactly what you're talking about, really like honoring the sacredness of the space was at the fore of what they wanted to do when they went into the Bixby marshlands. And so they brought local indigenous leaders to come in and bless the space and lead the participants through an experience of what the land means for them and how they understand this project. And so I think it's very much been at the fore, and it's very important to us, certainly.
Maybe Robert,
and can I just add to that? It's an important question. So I guess the quickest way to describe it is that you will talk about all the designs coming from the land, and there's no authorship. It's all coming from the land, and that's being transferred, and the artists are tongues for the land, and recognising land ownership and the custodianship that involves being a tongue for the land and maintaining these designs is why it's so important to recognise Indigenous land rights and to ensure that there's no mining and there's no interference from different sorts of developments. So that's the role of the art making or the acts of art, to maintain that narrative of the sanctity.
Very good. Thank you so much.